We're ready.
Ready.
My name is William J. Fiorentino. I go by Bill. I'm a retired Army officer from the Ordnance Corps, and I spent the vast majority of my career in the Army as a project manager of a couple of the major weapon systems for the Army, Pershing being one of those, Pershing-2 being a subset of the Pershing weapon system. And then from there, I went on to become the PEO, Program Executive Officer, for several of the Army's air defense systems. I'm now retired, living in Madison, Alabama.
Can you talk a little bit about the Pershing development and implementation? The reason that Klaus suggested that we talk to you was yesterday when I was showing him the list of systems that we had decided on that people had said were the most influential in changing the way the U.S. Army fought war. He kind of laughed and said, well, there's the most important systems missing here. And I think that General Fiorentino will be able to talk about that.
Well, I'm a little bit biased, but I happen to agree with Klaus. From a geopolitical or strategic sense, it is hard to envision a single weapon system that has had a bigger impact on the state of the world. Now, from a state of the battlefield, I'm a particular proponent of the English longbow, which I think revolutionized warfare. The machine gun changed warfare. The tank changed warfare. But when you go to the geopolitical sense, I think you can make a significantly arguable case that says the Pershing-2 system was responsible in a direct and immediate way for the breaking up of the Soviet Union and the tearing down of the Berlin Wall. In that context, I think clearly Pershing-2 is a candidate for one of the most significant weapon systems that the world has seen.
Can you talk about why?
I think so, yes. First of all, Pershing-2 was the third in the series in the Pershing family. We had Pershing, Pershing-1, Pershing-1A, and then finally Pershing-2. It was a nuclear system. It was deployed in Europe, and only in Europe, very extensively, and it was on what is called Quick Reaction Alert. It was a QRA system, which meant that it was going to be one of the first nuclear forces employed. When we began to do the Pershing-2 program, the Soviets became very, very concerned that here was a longer range Pershing, and they were convinced that not only could it hit Mother Russia, but it could also strike Moscow. As a result of that, they paid significant attention to the system. One anecdote of which I'm fond is the fact that I did several of my test shots from Cape Canaveral. As a project manager, I was required to pay for the instrumentation ship to watch the Pershing as it came in downrange into the ocean. I found out that under my budget, I could not always have the ship out there because it was very expensive. I found out later in life that the Russians usually had 2 instrumentation ships out there. I always wondered if it would have been cheaper to just buy my data from them, but we never explored that. But the bottom line was the Russians were significantly concerned about the Pershing-2. We believed it was a defensive, reactive kind of a weapon. I think in their heart and soul, they believed that it was an offensive weapon, and they were simply afraid of it. They worked very hard to prevent us from deploying the Pershing-2 in Germany. We went through things that I'll not go into here, but a great deal of effort to get that system deployed safely and correctly. And we had significant opposition in doing that. The German Green Party made it their objective not to allow us to deploy the Pershing-2. We were able to do it in spite of their objections. So when all was said and done and the system actually went into the field, the Soviet Union was very, very nervous about that. Added to that, the ground-launched cruise missile, which was being deployed about at the same time, and then you look at the pressures that were being applied politically, we had the various treaties, particularly the INF Treaty, which took a class of weapons out of the inventory. I don't know that there's a precedent for that in history. But anyway, as all of that happened, then we had a glasnost, we had perestroika, and basically one thing led to another, and ultimately the Soviet Union came apart, the Berlin Wall came down. I've got a cartoon that Klaus will share with you that gave the view of one of my project managers, who was also a very fine cartoonist, Colonel Ken Brown, and he drew a cartoon of that, which hopefully you'll see and enjoy as much as I do.
Can you talk at all about the acquisition process as it was related to the Pershing?
Yes.
Specifically, you're talking about the relationship between his Army team, Pershing, and the Martin team.
If you wouldn't mind, Klaus, I'd like to broaden that a little bit and make that one of several subsets to which I address my remarks. Pershing-2 was unusual in a couple of ways. First of all, I said it was the third in a series, or third in the family. And that goes directly to Klaus's point. The Army and the Martin Company, Martin Orlando, who was the sole source supplier of the Pershing family, had been working together for Lord only knows how many years. I was the 7th Pershing project manager when I took over, okay? So we had a long history of great support, great rapport, mutual respect, and performance behind us. But it goes deeper than that. President Carter made a commitment to NATO that we would deploy the Pershing-2. That commitment was picked up by at least 2 presidents, and I think it was actually 3 past President Carter. As a result of that, for instance, Secretary Weinberger was the Secretary of Defense during most of my tour, and I was Pershing project manager for 5 years. Weinberger was the SecDef for the majority of that time. Obviously, he shared in the presidential commitment to deploy the system. That commitment passed directly from Secretary Weinberger to Undersecretary of the Army Jim Ambrose. He was the #2 man in the civilian chain of command for the Army. He was an acquisition expert, and he and Weinberger had an especial rapport. So as a result of that, Ambrose took the program under his wing. For example, I was 5 years as the Pershing project manager. I never went to a DSARC, which is highly unusual, because I took the program through several major events, such as the initiation of production and deployment. Never saw a DSARC. Ambrose handled the DSARCs personally with Weinberger.
For my information, I'm not sure what's a DSARC?
What is a DSARC? Defense Systems Acquisition Review Council. It's a DoD body which comes together at the major milestones of a program, inception, and by the way, the names have all changed now, so you'll have to forgive me for getting them all wrong. But at the inception of the program, entering into full-scale engineering development, initial production, perhaps full-scale production, deployment. So the major events. And the position was very simple. The president has said we're going to do it. Why are we reviewing it? The only question is, does Fiorentino have it straight, and is it ready to go into the next phase? Secretary Ambrose spent a lot of time satisfying himself as to whether or not I had it straight. And as soon as he thought I did, then he would allow me, with Secretary Weinberger's approval, but on a one-to-one basis, he'd allow me to go into the next phase. So the program was very, very expedited in the sense that not all, but a lot of the review process, which is so costly in times and dollars today, was not there. Another dimension is that we took risks. For instance, there is a transition in any weapon system program where you say, okay, fine, these are R&D models, which I'm testing. These are production models, which I'm going to deploy. And at some point, you have to have both. Well, we took a very significant risk, and we started out by building building our R&D units on production hardware. That meant that we incurred the risk every time we made a change to our R&D model, which we did. We had to change tooling, documentation, and all the rest of it in production. We did that, and we did it successfully. As a result, our last R&D missile came off the line just ahead of our first production missile. There was no gap in the line, and nobody really knew, unless you checked the serial numbers, which was R&D and which was production. That could have pulled it off by virtue of a great deal of expertness, care, and I might add agony on the part of the government side and the contractor side. We did that successfully. Saved us a ton of money, and it saved us a lot of time. The commitment, though, I think that we saw across the board was probably the single biggest distinguishing characteristic that the program had. Had all these other things going for it, but without the commitment, so many of those other things would not have worked. Sir?
And how vital, sir, was your acquisition people to this whole process? You had a whole group in 4488 working specifically.
Oh, Klaus, I had a group across the country
Of acquisition folks.
Of people who were vital to the acquisition process. I had the whole combat developments group at Fort Sill. They're the ones that start the requirement. They're the ones that help to certify whether or not I'm meeting the requirement. We had the test group up in Virginia. We had the test ranges, White Sands and Cape Canaveral. We had the normal acquisition, the material developer crowd. I had people all over Redstone Arsenal. Not just the 80 or so that I had in my office, but I had 2 or 3 times that in the functionals, in the laboratories doing the R&D stuff, in the logistics group, in product assurance, in contracting. It was not something that the Pershing Project Office, narrowly defined, did. It was the Pershing family in its broadest context did this. And we had Martin, I've mentioned, as the prime contractor, but we had a tier of subcontractors who were every bit as good as Martin. And then under them were subs and vendors. Everyone was vital. It's like the missile. How many non-critical parts on there are on a missile? Approximately 0. Okay, you know, if the paint peels off, it'll probably fly. But if anything else in there goes wrong, you've got a problem. And it was the same way with the team. How vital was every member of the team? Couldn't have done it without every team member.
And ultimately, all this was done for?
Help me with the answer.
Are you talking about what was the reason for the...
Yeah, so what they're also looking for on this tape is, obviously, since AUSA, some short soundbite that the whole success of the Pershing, and Pershing was done, certainly you as a PM and the other PMs, you mentioned the acquisition team, your R&D people, everybody, but ultimately everybody, Martin, everybody's working towards one goal, which is to provide the soldier with the weapon that would ultimately
yes.
war.
And by the way, I will never know the answer to this, but I will surface it. For about 4 of my 5 years as the Pershing project manager, I would periodically be subjected to the question, why are you putting all this effort in? Because Pershing is only a bargaining chip. And that was on the table from about my 2nd year. And by the way, it was from people who had no reason to know. No one who ever knew would ever dream of asking a question like that if it were true. So yes, we were doing it to give the soldier the best weapon system that we possibly could and to give it to the country. There may have been a higher order which was intended. I don't know whether it was intended or not. It was certainly served, because if it was a bargaining chip, what a price we got. We bargained away Pershing-2, and we got in return the Soviet Union and the Berlin Wall. I would say that if it was a chip, whoever decided it was a chip, he deserves a bigger medal than I ever got.
That's a great soundbite.
She didn't believe me. She thought that every retired general officer was just stodgy old, you know.
Why does he say things like this?
Yeah, sleeping, right. Then I had to keep on poking you. Stay awake, sir. I told her.
Can you compare the acquisition process with the Pershing with any other system? Had you been involved with other systems?
Yes. As I say, I spent the majority of my career in what I refer to as project managery, so I've been in and out of several project offices. Pershing, I guess, from a size, complexity, and importance point of view, was, I think without question, the most important system with which I was associated. Little known fact, Mr. Historian, we did not bring the Pershing in on schedule. We brought it in 2 weeks ahead of schedule. Because think about it, the IOC date I was given was the 31st of December. Now when I came on board, I thought that's really a dumb date. Why do I want to be working and have all those soldiers and contractors and everybody else working on all the last minute details through Christmas and God help us through New Year's Eve? So I thought, shoot, they told me I was a project manager and I was in charge. I moved it back to the 15th of December and we met it. So at least, you know, Thanksgiving was trashed, but we got our Christmas and our New Year's.
And they loved you for it.
I'm sorry?
And they loved you for it.
I don't know if they ever realized it or not, but I knew, and that was enough satisfaction for me.
Sir, when we talk about the Army contractor team, our relationship with Martin.
Well, no, it's just because it has to cut across the vision line.
Our relationship with Martin, of any missile system we've developed since we started doing this stuff in the early 50s, our relationship with Martin was unique, though, wasn't it?
Absolutely, yes, without question.
I mean, it'll never happen again. It was,
I can't speak for the future. It's certainly unlikely. But I was on a first-name basis with 3 CEOs of the Martin Marietta Corporation as a colonel. You can probably find 1 or 2 other colonels that would claim that. Certainly Larry Capps at Patriot was on a first-name basis with the CEO of Raytheon. But that's not normal. Larry Sagel and MRS, certainly on a first-name basis with their CEOs. But I went through, was acquainted with 3 of them, and I called and they answered the phone, kind of thing. So will we ever repeat that? It's possible, not likely.
So one of the things we told Jan was that, well, what certainly as historians and as people who study military history, we think, as you mentioned, sir, a tremendous bang for the buck for Pershing, not only in terms of brought down the Soviet Empire, but also, sir, the fact that it never had to be fired in anger, it never had to kill anybody, break anything, and we were talking about that type of impact too. I mean, that you can't calculate how vital that was.
I would not know how to calculate an equation like that, but certainly the system worked. And you remember what I told you about the Russian trawlers? They knew it worked because they were out there gathering the data of better quality than mine. So they knew in their heart and soul that when we said, yeah, that worked, they knew it worked.
Can you speed us back the line there? Rolling.
One of the most significant features, I think, about Pershing was, if you think of it in the context of the bang for the buck, that not only did it work, we brought it in, as I told you, 2 weeks ahead of schedule. We brought it in on cost. And dragging the electronics, buddy. Yeah, okay, you can go away.
Okay, you got sound?
Are we sound? Rolling? Okay, you have sound? One of the most significant characteristics of the Pershing was in the context of the bang for the buck that we got out of it. When you consider that we never fired the system in anger, the only firings we ever had were test firings, either for R&D purposes or for the troop operational readiness firings. But the result of all of that was not only we were 2 weeks ahead of schedule, we were on cost, it worked as it was supposed to work, and as a bonus effect, we bring down the Soviet Union and the Berlin Wall. Not bad for one Army weapon system.
Beautiful.
Oh, he does this in his dreams. I mean, he can spit this stuff out.
Okay, can you talk about how the acquisition process has changed from when you began to the time that you retired?
You probably don't want me to, because in all honesty, I have grown disheartened with the acquisition process. We have a magazine, the National Defense magazine, and I was reading it about, it's probably 5 or 6 months ago now, and there was they put a series of little blurbs in there. One of the blurbs said that the Department of Defense is conducting a study to see how we can reduce the acquisition process from 12 years to 8 years. My blood ran cold because we did it in 4. So with all the improvements that we made to the process, we've managed to take it from 4 years to 12 years. And Lord only knows how much further it may go. So yeah, I see changes in the acquisition process. None of them are for the better as far as I'm concerned.
Can you talk about how things were done in World War II as opposed to when you were project manager?
Probably not. I don't think I would be authoritative on that at all.
Hold that, sir.
Hold that thought.
From the time that you started, when you started getting into the business, you were a fairly junior officer.
Yes, I was a lieutenant at the time.
From the time you were a lieutenant, under who was your first boss?
Would have been Glenn Crane on Nike X, or Nike Zeus, I guess it was.
Right. Under Colonel Crane, to the time that you were the Pershing PM, we had undergone a lot of changes.
Yes.
Those were for the good.
I think by and large they were for the good, yes. One of the things that we did was we established the project management concept with a formally designated project manager. The project manager was trained, so before this full colonel became a project manager, he had had a series of developing assignments so that he was reasonably qualified to become the project manager. Probably more important than that was we had a whole series of unbelievably well-qualified civilian deputies. When I retired, I put in writing as my part of my departing officer comments the fact that the average deputy, the average civilian deputy, was better than the average Army project manager. Most people weren't interested in hearing that, but it's absolutely true. Those civilian deputies were the lifeblood of the projects. And we had developed those people, we had nurtured them, we had matured them, and we put them in positions of responsibility where it was they who did the job. That's why I wanted Clarence here with me today. Oh, the Bill Jans, the Clarence Tidwells, his brother Billy Tidwell, Larry Sagal, Johnny Robbins. God, that's the trouble with starting a list. There's so many out there. I apologize to everyone I've forgotten. And I've forgotten more than I remembered, but that's part of having old timers. But yeah, that was one of the absolute strengths of the system. The project manager, by the way, in those days, was a member of the Commodity Command. As a project manager, I worked for the Missile Command Commodity Commander. And if I succeeded, he succeeded. And if, God forbid, I failed, he came down with me. I had his attention. When I walked in with a problem, he tended to listen. One of the things we've done with the PEO concept is we have decoupled the project manager from the commodity commander. Now you go out there and find a project manager, and you turn to General Sullivan, and General Sullivan is concerned about that project. But it's not in his chain of command. There's a difference. There is a difference. So the PEO concept, for all that it is focused attention, has also decoupled the PM from what I consider to be his lifeblood, which is the commodity command. And I was one of the initial PEOs, by the way, so I feel as though I have the right to be critical of the PEO concept.
Well, even if she doesn't use that, we're going to save that quote, because you said exactly, in a much more eloquent way, what we believe. It's true. It's crazy.
In all honesty, while I was PEO, we had been decoupled, but the memory still lingered on. And we were close enough, and you know, the old habits and all that. Well, the old guard has changed now 4 or 5 times, and the organizations have simply drifted apart, as organizations do. I mean, that is not to the fault of the PMs. It's not to the fault of the commodity command. It's simply a case of when you create organizational structures, there are walls go up. You remember MIRCOM and MIRADCOM? We took the missile command one day and split it into an R&D half and a readiness half. We created out of missile command, out of MICOM, we created a MIRCOM, the R&D command, and MIRADCOM, the readiness command. And my God, the next day there were masons out on, what's the name of that big road that runs down there, building a stone wall between the 2 commands. Anything to keep us apart. We finally had the good sense and the wisdom to put the command back together. That was the wrong thing to do. Pray one day we'll have the wisdom and the good sense to put the project managers back into the commodity commands.
But and it only happened in your time that at least the people quickly said, "Hey, we screwed up," and they quickly resolved it.
Yes.
It only took them 2 years to fix the whole
Yes, that's true. See,
hang on just a second. We've got somebody going through the picture. There we go. It's gone.
I mean, it only took us 2 years. And,
and we did realize it initially. See, that,
the process is not smooth.
well, but that was a situation where the Army in its wisdom chose to do that. The PEO is a matter of statute,
Right.
okay? So the Army is not unilaterally going to change the PEO structure.
What I need to do, sir, probably to try to explain this a little better, is draw out the simple line chart for her.
Okay.
The line from the soldier to, to finally up. That
Sure.
used to be a good direct line.
It was a very,
Now with the
very clear
PEO,
line. Yeah, yeah.
People matrix, but
Yeah.
you can't say anything about it.
Yeah.
You
And matrix works, by the way. I am a big advocate of matrix management.
it's only-
So long as everybody in the matrix is under the same 2-star general, then it works very nicely, because his common interest is that there be harmony. When they work for different organizations, maybe matrixing doesn't work quite as well.
I have one question to ask, and
You got 2 minutes.
it may not be, it may not get me where I want to go, but I had one historian talk about how the Spencer was acquired. That it
I'm sorry, how the what?
The Spencer was acquired.
The Spencer.
Yeah, Spencer. John, I think his name was John Spencer. He went up to the White House and said, "Mr. Lincoln, will you try my gun?"
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. I didn't recognize the Spencer.
And President Lincoln took it out and fired it toward the soon-to-be Washington Monument, and said, "This is a good thing." And he called up the Ordnance Corps and said, "We should get this." It sounds as though a little bit of you did a little bit of that with the Pershing. Can you talk about how that differed?
Okay, you're good. You're talking about the dispenser repeating rifle.
Yes.
Okay, I thought you were talking about a current system, and I was thoroughly confused. Okay, there's good and there's bad in one man going to one man, even if it's the president, and this one man saying, "Yeah, let's do it that way." Okay, and I don't advocate that at all. So there is a similarity and a difference between Spencer and Pershing too. The similarity is that the commitment was there from no less than the President of the United States of America. And in that regard, they are similar. They are quite dissimilar in that, having established the requirement and the commitment, then we were allowed to determine how best to do it. okay? We determined what technologies were involved, what engineering was involved, what test program was involved. In other words, he said, do it. Do this function. He gave us a mission order, if you will, or an intent. I intend to have a long-range nuclear missile in the Army. Yes, sir. And then we took care of the thousands and thousands of details, which were fully coordinated. So, and that's why when we were talking about the team, I could not say there was any one person. I was privileged to be the figurehead, but that's all I was privileged to be. But there were thousands of people that went into each and every decision. Well, I shouldn't say each and every major decision that was made. It was purely a team effort. So in that regard, quite dissimilar from the Spencer. If Lincoln had been wrong, the Ordnance Corps, of which I am a member, would have bought the wrong rifle. In the Pershing case, Carter did not run that risk because he had his full team that was making sure it was done right.
Beautiful. Excellent. Okay, I think it's a wrap. Do you have anything else that you'd like to say?
No, ma'am, I appreciate